Abhimanyu, and welcome to this morning's special online business briefing brought to you by Business Advantage PNG, PNG's top-ranked business media. My name is Andrew Wilkins. I'm going to be your host for this morning's event. We're going to be talking about e-government. We're going to be talking about PNG government's finances, and we're also going to be talking about support for small and medium-sized businesses. Before we start, a couple of pieces of housekeeping. This session is brought to you by Knapp, our sponsor for this morning's event, which is being brought to you free of charge thanks to their sponsorship. I also had an instruction about the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Please use that for any comments or questions you might have for our panelists today, and we'll endeavour to get some responses for you. And finally, this session is being recorded, so if you have any comments or questions, or if you have to run off, we'll get a link to the event afterwards, together with any slides from the presentation, particularly from the Asian Development Bank today. Before we start, just very briefly, the 2021 Papua New Guinea Investment Conference is on the 7th to the 9th of September. We're going to be taking PNG to the world with a unique online event which will bring local and international business people and investors together. Registrations are now open, so visit pnginvestmentconference.com, where you can view the latest programme and see an impressive array of speakers, which include highly respected economist Saul Eslake and Queensland's chief entrepreneur Wayne Gerard. We're really looking forward very, very much to bringing that event to you. Now on with the programme. Our first guest this morning is Stephen Matainaho. Stephen is the Secretary of Papua New Guinea's Department of Information and Communications Technology. The Digital Government Bill is due in Parliament next month and will herald what we hope will be a series of reforms that will improve the way government interacts not only with business and its citizens, but also how it works behind the scenes. So I'll welcome this morning to you, Stephen. Stephen, the Digital Government Bill is, I believe, scheduled to be presented to Parliament as early as next month. And I guess it's the representative of a big move, is it not, towards e-government and digitisation of government services. Can we start with the bill, first of all? What is it designed to achieve?
Thank you so much, for Andrew, for having me on this important session. First of all, we are keeping our fingers crossed for the Digital Government Bill to get through some of the finishing lines. The bill is, if I were to compare it to other legislation, it would probably compare to both the Public Service Management Act and the Public Finance Management Act in that it is one of those that has the whole of government approach to it. Now, as we all know, in many reports and many documentations and studies done on e-government, the only way to get a digital government, and I'm using the word digital government, is for a whole of government approach. And that's really what we are trying to do here. What the Digital Government Bill, proposed bill, proposes to establish is define a wide range of digital government related standards. So we are establishing standards across a wide range of ICT spaces. And it also established some compliance measures. So it's basically an enforcement mechanism for us to raise the standards across all government agencies and public bodies. And then it also establishes a whole of government governance structure for us to implement various e-government related initiatives.
So it's about getting the whole of government on the same page, if you like, making sure there are some standards that they can all follow.
Yeah, basically, and of course there are a few other very key important enablers within the bill itself. For example, we are now opening up our data to both private sector and the public sector through an open data provision in there. So basically, SMEs, business houses, corporate companies that need critical services such as digital ID verification, identification, and exchange of critical data ranging from different sectors, from weather to and well, the list goes on. It's a whole bunch of data that we start to now make seamlessly available to from government to government, government to business, and also government to citizen. So there's a list of enablers there that we have pegged in there, and I'm happy to talk a little bit about them as well.
Excellent. Well, Stephen, I guess we've seen some advances as far as improving digital services from government. For example, now you can go and get a visa online, pay for it online. That's just one example. I believe the Lands Department is also getting itself sorted as well. So as far as business is concerned, our expectation is being raised that we're going to be able to interact with government in a way that we've never been able to before, and in a much more efficient way.
Yes, I think efficiency is also the key word here as well, because through the various standards now, when we're talking about standards, we're also talking at an infrastructure level too. We want to make sure that government agencies are well organized and efficient in the way they present their services, and also the way that the design in which they put together their services.
So one of those things, obviously, is the front end, if you like, the end that interacts with the public or with business. And the other is the big issue is the back end as well. I imagine at the moment in government, right across government, there's little silos of information. Some of it's written down, some of it's in databases, some of it's in spreadsheets. Is there a program of bringing that data together or controlling that data, or even seeing what data you've actually got in government and making sure it's controlled properly?
Yes, and exactly. These are the key points here. We have a number of areas that will address those issues. First of all, within the bill, we're establishing what we call a secure data exchange platform. This will facilitate a secure exchange of data or a handshake of information to and from agencies, and again to citizens and also to business houses. That's a critical aspect of that's actually one of the core aspects of integrating government systems together. We also have we are talking about the importance of having government. When you talk about the back end, the engine has to be running well on the inside. Now, for a citizen or for business houses to see that services are running well, for that to happen, we need to set up proper framework for a secure infrastructure arrangement for government agencies to operate within. So at the end of the day, it's also about security as well, efficiency and security.
Security is a big issue, obviously, and it's one that governments around the world are experiencing challenges every day with hackers, formal and informal hackers attacking the systems. What does PNG need to make sure that its systems are secure?
Well, basically, to start off with, one of the standards would be cybersecurity standards that we need to have enforced. One of the key provisions in the Digital Government Bill is also the establishment of a national cybersecurity center, which we hope can eventually not just service government agencies, but even provide awareness, not only to agencies, but to public, to SMEs, and even have some high level of partnership with the bigger companies, so that we have a not just whole of government, but whole of sector approach to addressing cyber security issues.
How critical is it that you've now got on the ground in PNG your own data centres, which are being run by PNG Data Co, which have a certain level of security and reliability about them now? How critical are they going to be as far as supporting this project?
I think when you talk about efficiency, obviously you want to have some of our services for the citizens hosted in country, and of course that would be the ideal situation. We have to ensure that security is in place, security measures are in place, and that we have the capability of hosting these critical services within our critical infrastructures. So I think we're on the right track. DataCo is really pushing hard to make sure that we have a secure environment for that, and more discussions will be required to get to that ideal position where we can host our data and systems in country.
I know one of the projects you have underway at the moment is monitoring and making some assessment of PNG government websites. There are a lot of authorities and government departments that have websites. Not all of them have been kept up to date very well. Can you tell me a little bit about that project as well?
Yes, we've done some desktop study with on websites and web services offered by government, and to see where they're hosting it, how they're hosting it, and the security around it. We haven't really released that report, but what we can say is that there is a need for agencies to step up with the with the security, with the efficiencies, and this is really why the digital government bill is important, so that we can provide the enforcement mechanisms required to get them to that state where it's a reliable and efficient and fast service.
Right. What sort of projects should we be expecting in your program over the next 12 months? What sort of things are we likely to see develop?
Well, we've got two things running within the department, two major initiatives, and I mentioned to you sometime. I referred to it as a state in a phone project. Within the bill, it's basically called National E-Government Portal, where we will start integrating services and putting something online where you might see something like, for example, Australia has Services Australia, and so we've got that project running. Coincidentally, earlier this week, we had a departmental heads meeting online, and it was very successful. We had about 70 heads attended, and the main agenda was on getting that project started. So we'd like to have something, minimal viable product launched before the end of this year on that. Parallel to that is a secure data exchange platform. So we'd like to have more discussions also with interested vendors on that, and also within our we're also utilizing a whole of government approach on that to get the best expertise from within.
Obviously, there must be competing tensions as far as going digital is concerned. On the one hand, you want to get it done as quickly as possible. Technology in PNG is developing very, very quickly. Connectivity is developing very, very quickly. But at the same time, you need to have a managed approach. So I noticed in the context of that there was a little bit of tension about the Treasurer's discussions with Amazon in the last week or so. I think your minister talking about the importance of making sure these things were done in a managed way. What's your feeling about the best approach?
I think minister's position is that and again, when we're talking about these kind of services, so we're talking primarily about government cloud services. Just to make it clear, it's not cloud services in general. You know, we encourage any investor to come in, any partners to come in, but when it relates to public cloud services or government cloud services, I think it's important that minister has the ICT ministry has a say on it, and so that's also essentially pegged in the bill as well, that a due process must take place for the purpose of security.
Excellent. We've got a couple of questions coming through in the meantime, Stephen. So are you comfortable to answer a couple of questions while we have them?
Sure.
Excellent. This question's from Peter Harrington. He asks, how is this process working with the civil registration process, such as capturing biometrics for national ID cards, potential voter registration projects? Are these on the plans as well, or do you see that as a part of your project?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Peter Harrington, for the important question. I guess what you touched on is an important foundation of digital government, and that's the ID. Obviously, we got challenges with the NID. We've got a good team internally, led by Mr. Noel Mobia, really trying to push that agenda, and there's some technological changes happening in there as well, which is good news. And so we're hoping that we can reach a certain mark with the NID such that we have sufficient data to be used as primary data. Moving on from that, that will be critical in terms of the secure data exchange platform that we are building. And so I think obviously the ID, we have to get that right, and we have to make sure that the biometrics that we're collecting is up to standard with international standards.
Looking forward, obviously this is a very long process, and to a certain extent what we discover with digital is the job is never done because the technology is always changing, there's always more things you can do. But if we fast forward maybe 2 or 3 years' time, what sort of things do you think the public and the business community will see as a result of this project, as far as the way they're able to interact with PNG's government?
Well, looking at the stats now, we're sort of like, in terms of mobile network connectivity, we've got like about some data is saying that we're around the 45 to 50% mark in terms of population coverage. Other data is telling us that the tower coverage reaches 60%. And for us, that's good news, because with this agenda of a digital government, we're hoping that at some point in time, a lot of services we can start to see online, and we can start to, we want to develop indicators so that, the vision is that we have less lines and we have efficient services. So currently we're seeing, we've got good news, as you said, with Lands Department, Immigration. We have Department of Higher Education, and IPA has been a trailblazer with going online, and that's been a good start towards improving ease of business. But obviously, we still have a lot to go, and I think with the whole of government approach, we can actually achieve a lot as compared to standalone initiatives. So this bill is really important to get us to where we want to be, even if it means 2 years, setting some 2-year targets.
Excellent. Is there a copy of the bill anywhere for public consultation, or is it too soon?
You can extract it from, download it from our department website. We're on the 3rd iteration. It's with ict.gov.pg, and you can check the policy and legislation section.
Excellent. Another quick question from somebody. Is the department planning to have discussions with Amazon Web Services? That was related to my comment about the minister earlier.
Discussions with any cloud service provider will be subject to our government cloud strategy. So we need to get that in place before we start talking. And so I think it's important that we get our internal arrangements right. We need to know our cloud architecture and what we're going with to any provider. And obviously we also have DataCo there, and let's not forget that that's a major investment by government. And it may be that DataCo will have to be part of that process of discussing with any other cloud service provider.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I guess at the end, the incentive is little or no queues at government payment windows, electronic payments, and so on. So enormous benefits both to ordinary citizens in Papua New Guinea, but also to business as well, Stephen.
Yes, exactly.
Excellent. Well, we're looking forward very much to seeing the carriage of the bill, and very best of luck to you on this project, which I think is going to be a game changer for business, certainly. So thanks to you this morning, Stephen.
Thank you so much for allowing me to come and talk on the important work we're doing. Thank you.
Excellent. Our sincere thanks to Stephen Matainaho there, the Secretary for the Department of Information and Communications Technology. Now, our next topic is finances, government finances specifically. The final budget outcome for 2020, effectively a report card on the government's actual financial performance, has just been released. It shows how government revenues have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and it also shows us how much government spending has actually been occurring. Now, business needs a government that can fund its infrastructure, its health, its law and order and all the other services, and also pay its bill. So how did the government do? And what does the final budget outcome mean for government spending in this financial year? Joining me to discuss this is Abhimanyu Dadu, who is the public finance economist at the Asian Development Bank. He's one of the external consultants who's actually been working with the Department of Treasury on the final budget outcome. Abhi has prepared a special presentation exclusively for this morning's event, and I spoke to him a little earlier.
Thanks, Andrew, for having the ADB give this presentation to the members or audiences of the Business Advantage PNG. This PowerPoint is a quick guide to the 2020 final budget outcome. So if you are interested in reading it later, or you might know after this presentation what you're looking for, and perhaps even have some context around the numbers that are presented in that document. So what we're going to do is we're going to just quickly start with what 2020 was like globally. The first issue is that all governments around the world, all government expenditure increased. This is because they ramped up spending on health and stimulus spending. And the second was that the revenues fell, depending on the kind of economy and which sector contributes the most amount of tax. Some countries experienced larger revenue falls than others. For instance, countries reliant on tourism definitely suffered, like Fiji or Mauritius. And then there were countries that depended on minerals and oil and gas, such as Mongolia, Kazakhstan, even Papua New Guinea. So the pandemic has resulted in an increased fiscal deficits globally. Some had more than others, but really no one was spared. The IMF has the ability to estimate that and says that the overall deficits as a share of GDP in 2020, across the world, are projected to increase by 1.7 percentage points. And this is expected to be even larger for developing countries and for countries that are reliant on oil and gas and minerals for their revenue. So just to put it into context, PNG, which is both a developing country and reliant on revenues from oil and gas, had its deficit increased by 4 percentage points. And that compares to the global average of 1.7. So naturally, if fiscal deficits increase, it is natural that public debt will also increase. And global public debt is also now estimated to reach 98% of GDP. So effectively, across the world, we are borrowing as much as we are producing. As compared to that, Papua New Guinea is, I suppose, relatively better at 49.2% debt to GDP. Last year, the public debt globally is expected to go up by 5%, but in PNG, the public debt went up by 9%, according to what the final budget outcome reports. So overall, the results of the FBO in Papua New Guinea are very similar to what is being seen globally. Right, so before we dive into the government finances itself, a quick stop at the GDP growth story from last year for Papua New Guinea. The green bars are the rolling projections of 2020 GDP growth, and it's done by various organizations. By the end of the year, the impact of the pandemic is estimated to have been more acute than it was previously estimated, but that's not really surprising. As the pandemic developed, we got more information about how it's affecting businesses. And the other thing is that the contraction last year was slightly exacerbated by the Porgera mine suspension, which was a non-pandemic related event. That's just to keep in mind, and the GDP sort of obviously feeds into public finances because it's the underlying factor for government revenues in any given year. Right. So now the interesting bit, where the government spent the money last year. How much did it spend? Now the expectation of the expenditures last year, again, as it was globally, was that the government will preserve health of the country and stimulate the economy by continuing or increasing the contracts it gives out to the private sector. So basically, the government planned to spend 18.7 billion kina last year at the beginning. Then in the supplementary budget, they cut this expenditure plan down to 17.9 billion because they thought they needed to control the deficit. but they ended up finally spending 19.3 billion. So the government has basically spent an additional 1.4 billion kina extra over and above what it had planned under the 2020 supplementary budget. So for the business community, I suppose the most interesting items are capital budget and the goods and services budget, which is where private sector contracts are. Last year the government spent a combined 11 billion on just these two items, and the capital budget was the largest annual spending in the history of PNG, and so was the aggregate expenditure that was made last year. So I suppose in that regard, this is sort of good news. Now, obviously, this was done at some cost as it raised the deficit over and above what was planned, and it increased the requirement to borrow from the market. The additional spending that was done was partly offset by additional revenue that the government thought they wouldn't get, but they did. But they also had to go to the market to borrow to finance this. And finally, now let me say that the spending as shown by the federal government or the central government here, the FBO is a report of the central government. It does not necessarily mean that money actually reached all the way to the private businesses. The FBO accounts for expenditures that are made from the Waigani public account, which is the central public account. So for example, if the public account transfers money to the provinces as functional grants or into departmental trust accounts, the FBO will show this as expenditure incurred. But that does not mean that the provinces have spent it or paid out the contracts. This could be built up balances in their accounts. And it is perhaps in those details where most of us get lost, to try and find where the money is really. Right. So this slide is a more analytical representation of what government finances look like, or what they would mean, I suppose, to the private business community, more meaningful to the business community. Roughly, the government finances can be divided into sort of productive and non-productive expenditure for the private sector. Productive expenditure would be government contracts to private businesses that directly support jobs. This would be the entire capital budget of the government, plus I'd say roughly about 80% of the goods and services budget. It excludes items like personal emoluments that are paid out to civil servants, interest payments on debt, and small expenditure items directly incurred by the government in maintaining operations, like paying for fuel for its cars or expenditures of that sort. So these last items that I mentioned are the ones that are excluded from productive expenditure. So if you see the pie charts on your screen now, those show the difference between the productive or the growth supporting expenditures, which are showed in blue, and the other items of expenditure. Now, the structure of spending hasn't changed, although perhaps in an environment where stimulus is required, we would want to see a larger portion of the budget spent on productive expenditures. But that is not what the FBO reports. I haven't shown the 2019 outcome, but the 2019 outcome is exactly similar in terms of the share of expenditure between productive and other items of expenditure. However, as far as the quantity of spending is concerned, we did see the government increase 10% spending in productive items, or an increased budget that potentially goes towards the private businesses. Great. Okay, so so this slide just gives a comparison of how this expenditure was spent on various sectors. Now, these additional expenditures are compared to what was spent in 2019. And what we see is that most of the additional expenditure was incurred in economic, administration, and transport sectors. The transport, because the Prime Minister's flagship policy is increasing spending in construction and maintenance of its road networks through the Connect PNG program. Whereas most of the stimulus that was offered under the COVID-19 plan, I think some people might remember the 600 million plan that was announced by the Treasurer early in the year. All of this money was channeled through the economic and administrative sectors of the government. If there are any PNG stakeholders in the audience, other than the business community, they might notice reduced spending on health and education as per the government classification. Now, let me just state here that the government classification works in a slightly different way. Government classifies these sectors based on their agencies and which agency is broadly working in which sector. If you really want to know the full details of which department comes under which sector, you'll have to refer to the budget volumes, well, after volume 1, so volume 2 and volume 3. That's where they're quite categorically listed. Now, there are some details here that can't quite be shown in the graph, but which I believe might be of concern to some people in the audience. The first is the arrears. Now, in 2020, an arrears verification committee was formed by the treasurer to draw down some of the contractual debt the government has owed to businesses for services that have been delivered in the past. This is before 2020. Since the government didn't know the stock of these areas, so what they did is they invited firms to submit their claims. Businesses submitted 4.3 billion kina worth of claims to the committee, but only 13.4 were assessed and the government said that they are verified, they are legitimate claims. And out of about 13.4, about 13.4, which forms about 570 million, 255 million was actually paid out last year, so it cashed out. The rest of the arrears, and obviously that's about 86.6%, were deemed non-compliant with the Public Financial Management Act or the National Procurement Act of 2018. At least that's what the FPO says. But more importantly,
that's an extraordinary amount, Abhi. 86% of the money that the government owes is they didn't consider it to be genuine debt.
No, that's not what that means.
Right. Okay.
I suppose that is the issue, because the stock of areas is not actually known. And looking at it from the government's point of view, the only way to do it would be to invite these areas in and then actually go through one by one on which of these areas are. And I suppose, the natural conflict is going to be, okay, which ones are verified, which ones are legitimate, and which ones are not. The government is going to push that not all of them are legitimate. The businesses are going to push that all of them are. But eventually, what's happening, well, we don't have the information, but just from anecdotal evidence, the areas are sort of a stimulating factor of their own in the economy. So if areas get built up, then it is basically pulling power out of the economy. And so I think the problem is that we don't know last year whether the government was able to reduce its stock of areas or whether they increased it on a net basis. That's another issue. Generally, in countries with weak public financial management, a larger budget might be accompanied with larger year-to-year areas, but we don't have the data here. This only relates to areas in contractual obligations, but the government also has areas with regards to areas owed to number one super for the retirement benefits of public servants, which is also building up year by year if they don't retire public servants beyond retirement age. So if you're waiting in line for areas owed to you, there's a parallel line running next to yours, and the government is trying to serve each through the same window, effectively, through the same budget. Now, the trust accounts. The trust accounts are accounts that are authorized by the Ministry of Finance for other departments to hold so that they can smooth out expenditures. Effectively, WPA sort of approves a large chunk of expenditure, perhaps together, depending on their cash flow, and then the department can sort of then relay the money out depending on their contractual obligations. So once money leaves the Waigani public account, the money is deemed spent as far as the final budget outcome is concerned. So that will become part of the 19.3 billion that we showed here. So if you're sort of a business dealing with the government, you might want to find out whether your money will come from a trust account or whether it comes directly from the Wairani public account. There is a list of budget-funded government accounts given in the FBO. It might not be an exhaustive list, and certainly the beginning balance, the debit, credit, and the ending balance of these accounts don't match in the FBO as they should. But this is like more of an ongoing exercise. There's always new trust accounts that are being opened and closed, and it takes a big exercise to sort of reconcile these. But the FBO does estimate that about 481 million in total of the total budget was sort of spent through these trust accounts last year. And in addition, trust accounts were also created for COVID-19 related expenditures to fast track that earmarked money. So about 124 million was spent through these trust accounts, and they still have a pretty large balance left in them. So about 94 million. So effectively what that means is 124 plus 94, 220 million or 218 million was what was authorized to be, was what would be considered expenditure. But then out of that, only 124 has actually reached contracts or paid out contracts, and 94 million is still sitting in trust accounts. And this amount, the FPO says that this amount will actually be spent this year. Now, as I had mentioned, the government raked up a deficit of 7.3 billion, and some part of the additional deficit was financed by higher than expected revenue. At supplementary budget last year, the government had expected 11.3 billion in revenue, but they ended up collecting 12 billion. Certainly good news. This was supported by personal income taxes and non-tax revenue. GST was lower, but that was expected due to the lockdown and the seizure of sort of business activity and general domestic trade. But the issue in the revenue is the corporate income tax. The corporate income tax was lower than expected in 2020 and was lower than in 2019. And this is a concern because 2020 payments reflect business profits from 2019. As a lot of businesses might know, we pay taxes in PNG on, well, businesses pay taxes in PNG on incomes derived in the previous year. So tax receipts in 2020 are a reflection of profits in 2019, so to speak. This means that a poor business year the private sector had in 2020 is yet to manifest in corporate income tax in 2021. The non-tax revenue also did quite well, as I mentioned. PM Marape and Treasurer Stuckey were able to squeeze out more dividends from Kumal Petroleum, and that certainly helped. They had to recover from their loss of income from the Supreme Court judgment on the PMMR Act last year. So that is statutory income that the central government could not access. Right, and finally, the financing. Firstly, there was a lot of uncertainty last year when the government released its supplementary budget. It had an expanded deficit plan in it. And there was a lot of uncertainty at that point from businesses whether the government would be able to raise all this financing that it had planned. As you can see, the government raised this financing and then some. But the additional debt was borrowed in the domestic market in short-term borrowing. The government was able to meet pretty much 100% of all the concessional loans that it had planned at that point. So that's, I suppose, a success. The debt stock at the end of all this, like I said, is 49.2%. As far as public debt goes, governments usually increase their absolute stock of public debt, and what they rely on GDP growth so that their debt to GDP may remain under control or even reduce at certain times. PNG's debt to GDP ratio is rising. It's been rising for the last 7 years now. So it is important that the government makes these expenditures towards productive items on its budget, the productive items that we spoke about, that can support sort of GDP growth, so that it can come back in a full cycle and actually help the government in its debt to GDP ratio. I suppose that brings me to the end of the presentation. Now, hopefully this was, as intended, a summary and a guide for you to navigate the FPO document. And if you are a private firm doing business with the government of PNG, thank you very much.
The big question, and maybe it's not absolutely clear as we're now halfway through the current financial year, is what impact do you suspect that, knowing these figures now from the final budget outcome that as we do, what impact is that likely to have on government spending this year?
There's just a lot of uncertainty, and
Yes.
this uncertainty affects government finances as well. I can just tell you about my experience working within the government. Our supplementary budget looked nothing like our 2020 budget, and the FPO looks nothing like what we planned in the supplementary budget. The other thing is that I believe a second wave has hit Port Moresby. There's even talks of the Delta variant being present. I don't know. Certainly, there was a lockdown early in the year as well. While I was talking to my colleagues at the Treasury, that is bound to affect some expenditure plans that the government had. So really, I suppose we just have to wait about 10 days more, because that's when the mid-year economic and fiscal outlook will be released. And we'll know sort of the state of government finances for the first 6 months of 2021.
You mentioned that the debt to GDP ratio is up almost to 50%. And while internationally that doesn't sound too bad, for Papua New Guinea, that's as big as I think it's ever been. So how much bigger can it get before it starts to become unmanageable? And we're looking at maybe 10% of all expenditure just going to service that debt.
That's the same question I suppose I'm asking myself. As far as the rating agencies who are rating government's paper, there was a deterioration last year, but then there was a deterioration throughout the world. Now, I suppose it is definitely a concern in the sense that it's not just that it is at 49.2%, it has risen very sharply over the last 6 or 7 years, and the GDP has not kept up pace with the speed of increase of that public debt. As I had mentioned in my presentation, generally governments will look to increase public debt anyway, without a plan to reduce it or sort of into the infinity in the future. But what they rely on is sustained GDP growth along with it, so that it keeps so that they're still getting revenue, and they are getting consistent revenue to keep servicing whatever the annual costs of debt are, so the principal and the interest amount. Now in PNG government has a very good record in terms of servicing its debt, which means that they pay their debt on time and in full. There is enough liquidity, I suppose, in the system for the last 2 or 3 years. I suppose I haven't really found any complaints that there is a lack of liquidity in the system. So, I suppose if there is liquidity, then in all probability, if the commercial banks want, they can keep lending. And of course, the Treasurer has also made some really good relations across our international concessional partners. So even those sources of financing are open.
And finally, you mentioned the mid-year financial statement the Treasurer is likely to make in the next few weeks. What would you be hoping to see in that statement? One
of the big issues is the personal emoluments. And I think this is something that the Treasurer really wants. But it's proving much harder than, I suppose, what the government anticipated initially.
This is salaries paid to public servants, basically.
Yeah, so that's eating away into the government expenditure in the sense that it is going towards civil servants who should have retired many years ago, but they're still on the payroll. And obviously this is, I'm sure the salaries have to be paid out, but overall in the economic scheme, it's it might be deemed, I suppose, analytically as unproductive. But once you retire these public servants, and that will also come with a large bill, and that was part of the budget for 2021, is that they will retire a lot of the additional staff in government, so that they can reduce their personal emoluments bill. That's one thing. Just wanted to see whether that has been able to whether that has kept up pace. And the second thing is the arrears again. There's again an arrears budget in 2021. And the question is, how fast is the arrears verification committee moving to verify these arrears and get them off the books so that the businesses are paid out and they can move forward.
And our sincere thanks to Abhimanyu Dadu from the Asian Development Bank for joining us for that session, an exclusive presentation just for you this morning. Finally today, our regular segment, The Inside View. Each month, we talk face-to-face with a PNG-focused executive about a single business topic. This month, the topic is finance for small and medium-sized businesses. As you'd be aware, a lot of SMEs have been badly affected by the economic downturn caused by COVID-19. But there is some good news, and it's in the form of a 20 million kina scheme to provide grant money to PNG and Pacific SMEs to help them adapt and recover. So who can apply and how much money can you get? Joining me to talk about the fund is Steve Knapp, the Programme Director at Business Link Pacific. Steve, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. Welcome this morning. So tell me, how much are these grants for and who can apply for them?
Right. Well, Business Link Pacific that manages the grants. We're a New Zealand government initiative that's delivered by DT Global. And the small grants come under a new initiative, which is the SME Finance Facility. And what we're focused on is providing the business advisory services and also the finance that SMEs need in order to survive in the first instance, but looking forward to grow and expand and employ more people. So these grants are pitched at small businesses, small medium enterprises that have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and the grants are available of up to 12,000 kina for businesses with up to 5 employees, up to 24,000 kina for businesses with up to 20 employees, and then up to 50 employees. There's a grant size of 36,000 kina. And sorry, go on.
What's the purpose? What can they use this money for? Presumably, it has to be used for specific purposes.
Yeah, it's available to businesses from across all sectors. We asked the businesses to present some of their financial information so that we can see that they were, profitable pre-COVID, that they've got a solid business foundation to build on. And then also we can see how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the business. And we asked them to present what we call an adaptation plan or just a short basic business plan of how they would use the grant monies to support change in the business or support different initiatives within the business that will help them to survive the current pandemic. So, we've seen grant applications in the first round for a whole range of different business ideas. We've seen lots of businesses looking to take their business online, sell their goods and services online. So that's very topical with the previous presentation this morning. That whole digital transformation of business, I think, is going to be very important in PNG through the pandemic and going forward. But a whole range from businesses that have focusing on takeaway foods or restaurants changing the focus of their business. Retail businesses looking to provide business products that are import substitution or building up their stock levels because they've run them down because of the pandemic. But one of the really interesting areas that we've been working with is with access to finance and businesses applying for a grant, which they then use as equity to access a loan. So, working very closely with the government concessional loan scheme and also, this week, Kinabank launching a new SME loan product as well, where it is a new product specifically for the SME market.
just to be clear, your particular scheme, that this money is grants, so you weren't expecting them to be repaid. That's correct, isn't it?
No, that's right. The grants are a grant. There's no repayment there, but what some businesses have got a larger plan that they want to put in place that costs more than just that grant amount. So what we work with them to do is use the grant money as equity to then access a bank loan. And another part of the grants is that we provide wraparound business advisory support that goes with that grant money. So, rather than just giving the business a grant and letting them, then work out what they're going to do with it, we'll provide some business advisory support through local accounting firms and local business advisors that can help those businesses to really make sure that they use those grant funds in the most effective and efficient ways for the business.
The key date, I believe, is coming up very soon, the 27th of July. Is that correct?
Yeah, so this second round of grants closes for applications on the 27th of July. So if anybody's interested in applying, get all your business information together. Go to our website, which is businesslinkpacific.com, and you can go through there to the grant application process. If you've got limited internet access, then please contact your local Chamber of Commerce, and they'll help you with the grant application process.
So it's worth pointing out that both the Port Moresby and the Lae Chamber of Commerce are aware of this scheme and are available to people to help. Is that right?
They are, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. What sort of follow-up is done after the grant to make sure that money is spent correctly?
Well, the grant, the businesses apply for a grant. We assess those applications, and then we link them up with a local business advisory service provider. So a local firm will then help them to get their adaptation plan in place, verify some of the financial information they've given us. If their accounts are out of date, they'll help them get their information up to date. And then once the grant's paid, that business advisory support can continue. We ask for receipts and evidence of how the grant's been paid after it's been paid out, just to make sure that the business has used it in the way that they pitched it in the application.
What sort of things have you learned in running the program about how SMEs are affected by the current circumstances, and how innovative they're being to get out of the circumstances they find themselves in?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty bad across the Pacific at the moment. I mean, we work across 8 Pacific Island countries, including PNG. I mean, particularly markets where businesses are so dependent on the tourism industry, and the lack of travel has really devastated some businesses in that way. But across the board, we've seen pretty bad reports from the SME sector. There's a lot of support needed to make sure that small businesses survive this pandemic. But I think on the positive side, what's really come across is how resilient businesses in the Pacific are, and how entrepreneurial business owners are. We've had some really great ideas coming through as to how they can use grant monies to reinvigorate parts of the business or move into new business ventures. But I think one of the important things that we've been looking at is there's different aspects to it. So the business advisory services is a really important aspect. Then the access to finance, whether that's through grants or concessional loans, or that finance that businesses need in order to survive. And then the third part is that enabling business environment. And we've been working very closely with small business, the SME corporation around that business enabling environment for SMEs as well.
Excellent. Stephen, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for coming on and telling us about the scheme. Perhaps you could just remind people again where they can go to find out more information about how to apply.
Yeah, so please head to our website, which is www.businesslinkpacific.com, or your local Chamber of Commerce, POM Chamber of Commerce, Lae Chamber of Commerce, or contact us direct through the website if you need some additional support.
Excellent. And 27th of July, that's the big date. So good luck with your applications. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Steve.
Great. Thanks, Andrew.
So our sincere thanks to Steve Knapp for that, and also to our other speakers, Stephen Matainaho from the Department of Information and Communications Technology, and also Abhimanyu Dadu from the Asian Development Bank. That's all for today. Thank you for participating. Our thanks again to our sponsor for today's session, Kina Bank. Thanks very much, Team Kina. This online business briefing is the latest in an ongoing series. You can see previous episodes on our YouTube channel. A reminder that our next online event will be the 2021 Papua New Guinea Investment Conference, taking place from the 7th to the 9th of September. Registrations are now open, and looking forward to seeing you during the event. To keep in touch with what's going on in business in Papua New Guinea, visit businessadvantagepng.com. You may also follow us on Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn. Until next time, please stay COVID safe, and may your business have the advantage. Goodbye.